To claim honor for one's individual self in the Mediterranean world is to play the fool. How was the State of the Union last night, by the way? Just asking. Honor is always a matter of public recognition from others. Our culture is not an honor culture. We're going to see that in the second hour. Jesus himself acknowledges that honor is always a matter of public recognition from others. John chapter 5, verse 31. Jesus said, "If I bear witness to myself, my testimony cannot be verified." But please note the contradiction over in chapter 8. And this is very important. John 8:14. Jesus answered and said to them, "Even if I do bear witness to myself, my testimony can be verified. For I know whence I have come and whither I am going, but you do not know whence I come or whither I am going." Wait a minute, that sounds like a complete 100. What happened there? What happened there? Well, the contradiction to John chapter 5, verse 31, my testimony doesn't verify anything. By John 8:14, my testimony is valid of my own individual self, has led some biblical commentators to posit that there were different editors, different redactors at different times. Look at the case of the synoptic tradition, right? You've seen a little version of that before. I'm making it a little more complex. That Matthew and Luke have sayings that are common, that are not found in Mark. They have a narrative that's common, that's not found in Q. There must have been two sources there, right? You all see the four-source theory. But Luke has stuff that's unique to Luke. That must come from another original source called L. And Matthew has stuff original to Matthew. That must come from another original source called M. We'll get more into those later. As the case in the bottom graphic, right? Jedtr, that's Deuteronomist. This is the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. When you look at the Torah, you see there's a bunch of sources, but that R with the arrows going horizontal, see the R on the left side? That's the redactor, who's taking these traditions and editing them up. Obviously, Moses didn't personally write the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. When you begin to look at it like that, it comes from many generations, centuries of additions and redactions and so forth. So maybe that happened also internally in John as it went through different versions. And that's why we got this bizarre contradiction here. Chapter 8, verse 14 says the exact 180 degrees opposite of chapter 5, verse 31. Boy, if you're a fundamentalist Catholic or Christian, you got problems on your hands when you start looking at this. Redaction is a form of editing in which multiple source texts get put together, redacted, and altered slightly to become a single document. Often redaction involves collecting a series of writings into a similar theme, editing them together into a definitive and coherent work. Well, we hope it's coherent. Humans make errors. Can we pause there? Yeah, redacted. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Twin Peaks, and a lot of people know this. Like, obsessed would be a nice word. And they had Mark Frost, the co-creator of Twin Peaks, came out with this beautiful book called The Secret History of Twin Peaks. It's a 480-page book, and if you've been sitting for 25 years without anything new coming from them, David Lynch and Mark Frost, this was like a treasure. Came out about a year before the series premiered, maybe half a year, 3/4. Anyway, a whole bunch of it you see redacted because it's FBI files and you're not able to see. It's so frustrating because as you're reading through it, this is redacted, this is redacted. The stuff that usually would lead you into stuff that would come in season 3, which premiered after the book came out, was published. Yes. So that also applies to biblical texts and their evolution. That certain things were changed, certain things were omitted. That's part of the redaction. They've been modified, they've been altered slightly. Right, you got it. Your eyes only kind of thing. Yeah.
some translations of traitors.
All translations are all translations are betrayals, and all translations. But we still have to use them. That's the messiness of human existence. And all translators are traitors, Lucy. All. They don't mean to be, but that's just part of the job. It comes with the. Better put it on the resume. Yes.
Can you briefly explain the process a scholar would use in order to determine whether something's a redaction or not?
Well, precisely by looking at data that seems to be contradict 180 degrees. And so you see Jesus is saying one thing over here. We saw this last week, Mary, when last week we were talking about how in the early chapters of John, there seems to be this pattern of missionary activity, pattern of evangelization. Y'all remember that? Yeah. But we note that by the time the final edition of John comes out, when we read John as a whole text, nobody in this community is evangelizing anybody anymore. They have stopped going out missionary. So then why do you have this evangelization pattern earlier on? Well, there must have been a period in John's community, which is being reflected in these old verses, the origins of the anti-society verses, chapter 1 of John, verses 19 to 51, that reflect and remember that earlier, nicer time when the Johannine community was very similar in some ways to the Pauline communities and to the Petrine communities. They went out and they thought that the world, the dominant society, Israel, deserved evangelization. And so they tried to actively bring people in. But that time had long passed. But still it's fossilized there in the text. So that's an indication, whoa, that maybe there were earlier versions of John, or an earlier source that the community had, that they remembered this pattern. And you remember, of course, that pattern was different, right, than the way the synoptic tradition remembers Jesus gathering some of these same disciples. In the synoptic version of Mark, it's in Galilee, and Jesus calls them and they drop their nets, right? Remember that? Is that how it is in John? No, first it's a beloved disciple, we'll get to him later on, an unknown disciple, who's a disciple of John the Dunker, and Andrew. John the Dunker points, and then they go. And then Andrew brings Peter, the third, not the first in John. Remember, who is the first in John? Andrew's the first named, but the first is the implied, the beloved one, the unnamed disciple. Right. Of course, the beloved disciple never met Jesus actually in historical reality. He met Jesus in alternate reality. He was probably born after Jesus had died and was risen. None of the evangelists, the authors of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, were eyewitnesses to Jesus. Those names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, come from 180 Common Era. The documents never had autographs. Redactions, by the way, you see, I'm trying to show you, these documents evolve. And they're interpreted again and reinterpreted again and canonized. And now that's a very interesting organic process of growth. So yeah, so little internal evidences that you look at, oh wow, that tells scholars maybe there's been a few additions here. We can't have metaphysical certitude, but it seems to be very clear, it's reasonable to assume that there's when you look at Noah, the story of the flood, very carefully, you begin to see weird things, like here it says it rained for 40 days, right? And it says there were 7 pairs, the clean animals came in seven pairs, right? And then the other version of as you're reading along, you say, wait a minute, no, they came in 2 by 2. It said, that contradicts. If you carefully read, you see that there's actually 2 traditions that have been spliced Frankenstein style together. There's actually 2 stories of the flood that have been combined into one story. That's a redaction. A redactor was at work. That makes sense? And that's your evidence for that. Okay, let's continue. Myth is a different thing. Myth is a literary genre. Myth is a literary genre. We're talking about editing now. the process of editing. Okay, but now you're right. Anything in Genesis chapter 1 through 11 is ancient Near Eastern religious myth. A myth is that which will always be true, never happen. That's myth. We are starved for myth in this culture. That's why we flock to Star Wars. A very commercial myth, okay? But we love it. And that's why we go to Marvel Comics movies, because we want myth. That's why we love it when the Justice League assembles there, because it's the Olympian gods, right? It's everybody, and Superman is like docetic Christ, standing there right in the middle. We like that. They're all standing there. It's like because we're starved as a culture for myth. We're starved for myth. Okay. Hey, thanks for watching. Just continue the playlist for the next part of the study. If you have further questions, this is good. They will get addressed, so keep watching. If you found value, please subscribe, like, and share. As always, questions, comments, and criticisms are most welcome. God bless you.